Howdy folks. Well, here's a story I promised to tell you about a wonderful lawman we had, the sheriff out in the county where that buffalo ranch was at. He was as good a lawman as I ever met, and I grew up with cops. My dad was one for 35 years, and I grew up fishing with nothing but cops, and then my son became a cop after college, so I've been around a lot of lawmen, both good and bad, and when I tell you this Wally was as good a lawman as I ever saw, you can take that to the bank. So he'd been out there chasing those glowing green lights for 2 or 3 summers, maybe 4 summers when this particular night happened. And I think there was 27 different nights that we had deputies and the sheriff out chasing these lights that got recorded and went in the newspaper and everything else. Now, when I speak of these lights, they weren't in the sky. They looked like old Jeep headlights, and it was always a single, and it was the color of night vision goggles, you know, that lime green kind of luminescent stuff. And well, Wally, he'd been out there a number of times and helped us chase that stuff, and this man was fearless. So he called up one night and said he was going to just drive through the ranch, and he had a ride along. Now, with all the nonsense that was going on that ranch, I had a ranch radio. Actually, we had 2 different frequencies of ranch radios, and I had a sheriff's department radio because we had them out there so much with these mutilations and whatnot. So well, he called one night and said he had a ride along and he was going to drive out to the farm ground. And anywhere you went on that ranch, you had to come through my yard, that 3-4 acre yard where the pens were and such. And we kind of had some hard and fast rules when people were on that ranch because so many weird things were going on. So if somebody was out there at night looking around or chasing aliens and stuff, you don't want anybody else out there because you don't know what kind of gunfight might have erupted, you know. So Wally called and said he was going out to the farm ground on the north end of the ranch. It was a good 4 or 5 miles from my house. And he had a ride along, and I told him I'll stay in the house, you know, no deal. It's a weeknight anyway. I was sitting there reading a book, and I saw him come through the yard and headed out. And it was kind of rolling country. You really couldn't see his headlights or taillights. You could see the glow of them every once in a while. So he'd been out there about an hour, and all of a sudden that radio come alive. And I mean, clicks and static, and he's yelling, and I could hear his ride along in the background yelling. And I mean, to tell you, my heart stopped, and I'm calling him, you know, Wally, what's going on? And click and crackle and static and then silence. And what do I do? You know, do I go after him? And we made the rules, you know, when somebody's out there, they don't want anybody else interfering or chasing somebody they shouldn't. And when these mutilations first started, the ranch owner gave us a big chunk of money, and we had AK-47 semi-auto rifles with Russian night scopes. We had Chinese night vision goggles, and I mean, this was serious stuff. By the time they'd killed 25, 30 buffalo, you're looking at close to $50,000 in losses. So I'm standing there with this semi-auto assault rifle, got my night vision goggles, and I'm standing out by the gate, and I don't know what to do. Do I go after Wally, or do I just stay in the house? And finally that radio comes alive again, and he goes, Jeff. And I click back and go, I hear you, what's up? And he goes, I'm effing surrounded. I guess I'm out of here. And the radio went dead. And, you know, I'm calling him back and nothing. And I thought, now what the hell do I do? And finally, off in the distance, about 2 miles, I could see the glow of his headlights up in the sky when he'd come over a hill. So I knew he was coming towards me. And so I'm standing there locked and loaded, and my finger on a very light trigger, and just wondering what's going on. And finally, he comes over the last hill, no more than maybe 100 yards max from my gate where I'm standing there. And he comes over the hill, and I could see those Jeep headlights. He was in a Wagoneer. As soon as he breaks over that hill, here's 6 of those alien lights behind him, 3 on each side in a half circle, and they were right on his butt. So now I don't know what to do for sure. You know, I'm thinking, they're going to get me too, you know. And so I just stepped out of the gate, and Wally come through, and he had a 45 in both hands out either window, and he's driving with his knee. And that old boy that was long on the ride along, he's scrunched down in the seat, and he ain't making a sound. And Wally drives this far past me, and he don't even look at me. He just keeps driving. And just as he hit that gate, the first 2 lights went out, then the next 2, and the back 2. and Wally didn't stop. He just took off, you know. And I'm more than freaked out. I mean, to tell you, standing there all by myself in the middle of this ranch with these lights that just went out. But anyway, I get back to the house, and again, that was a pretty sleepless night. Now, this was in October, and Wally was up for re-election in the November elections, and he was a shoo-in. I mean, everybody in the county loved him. This guy was a good lawman. That night, he didn't show up to work for about a week, 5, 6 days, something like that. And then the 5th or 6th, 7th day, whatever it was, he come in and turned his car in, his unit, that Jeep, and then he withdrew from the election. And I never talked to Wally about what went on. I'd see him in a restaurant, and his wife was actually dispatcher at that time for the sheriff's department. And I'd see him and walk up and say hello, and they were always cordial, and they'd just stand up and leave wherever I run into him. This went on for several years. And finally, 4 or 5 years later, a common friend put us together. And he wanted us to talk about it. He was all intrigued by the alien stuff. And we sat there and visited, drinking coffee for probably 3 hours and never said a word about those aliens and the lights and everything. And he never did mention what happened that night. And finally, we worked around to the subject, and he didn't have much to say. You know, this third party said, "Do you believe in aliens?" And he says, "I believe in what I saw." And he looked at me and he says, "How about you?" And I said, "I don't know either. I never saw one, but something weird happened out there for 9 years." And that was the only discussion Wally and I ever had. Poor old devil died not too long after that of the cancer, but that was a heck of a story, I'll tell you.